Hello and welcome to the 81st anniversary, or 81st anniversary of the Battle of Midway. It's the 81st anniversary, or in this case, commemoration of the Battle of Midway. Now, why is Lord Holland playing a Japanese ship? Isn't the commemoration or the anniversary for Americans? Absolutely. But it's also for the Japanese. Because the Japanese lost over 3,000 airmen, 4 aircraft carriers, 1 cruiser, which was a Mogami class, the Mikuma, and lost a lot of pilots and men. America lost like 362 men, 1 carrier, a destroyer, and 144 aircraft. That's a lot of life lost over a pivotal battle. And everyone celebrates the Japanese, or celebrates the American victory. But it's important to remember the Japanese. These were, young boys that fought for their country, nationalized and fought for their country, and died doing what they believed was right at the time. I think it's usually forgotten that World War II, while it was a battle of armies, it was a battle of ideologies, both on the human front and on the scientific front. It was an ideology battle overall. And for the scientific, you had for instance, on the Manhattan Project, you had basically on the American side, the Jewish scientists, and then on the German side, you had Aryan scientists. So it was basically one could say a battle of religions over this creation of the bomb. Now, I'm not saying Nazism is a religion. That's not what I'm saying. Let's be honest. And this is a commemoration for soldiers. But it's also important to remember that the ideologies that the Japanese soldiers were indoctrinated in had been going on for well over a decade before Midway in 1942. Let's be honest, it started years before Midway. These soldiers were convinced long before the attack on Pearl and before World War II started for America. Most people would think, World War II started at, in Europe with Hitler and the invasion. Well, no. It started in Asia with the Japanese invasion of Manchuria and invasion of China. Annexation and invasion of Manchuria and the invasion of China. World War II started in the Pacific by nationalized ideology soldiers that fought and believed that they were doing what was right. So it's important to remember the Japanese airmen, soldiers, and sailors that died. Yes, they committed heinous crimes against humanity, but they were also human beings at the same time. And it's best to always remember that the people that were lost in World War II, civilians, there is a reason. And historians have a good term for this. World War II was the last great conflict that costs, well, a significant amount of life. I don't remember the exact estimate off the top of my head, but I want to say it was between 60 and 70 million, I thought, last I checked. I could be wrong on that number. I'm absolutely certain that it wasn't 60 and 70 million, but it was an extremely high amount of individuals that died. And a lot of those were civilians from the Soviet Union and the Chinese. Were Chinese and Russian civilians that were Chinese that were taken by the Japanese invading force, and the Russian civilians that were taken by the German invading force. It's important to remember that. And we still see that damage that has been caused by World War II and those atrocities still today in modern politics. We see that Japan and China's relations have never changed and have constantly gone sour since the end of the war. Japan and Korea are at the exact same. You know, their relationship has been scarred by what happened in Manchuria. Because these were, well, Korea was a part of China.
Enemy cruisers sunk.
But it was more like a province of China that was annexed by the Japanese. So we're gonna add a part of what was it? The Shanghai Shek's nationalist China that was annexed by the Imperial Japanese Empire. But it's also important to remember that even though this was considered under China, the Korean people were still Korean people, or Manchurian. They were still who they are today. Their culture still existed and suffered under this. And we see that in Korean and South Korean and Japanese politics. But we see that the Japanese and the South Koreans are finally starting to come together. But it took 81 years for this pain that it happened to be reconciled with. The damage from World War II exists. And I don't think it will be gone within my generation's lifetime. I was born in 1993. I don't believe the damage is ever going to disappear before I die. Let's be honest. It's going to persist. Because it's going to go from living memory to living memory. We're never going to forget what happened. And the Koreans, the Japanese, and the Chinese will never forget. They're never going to forget. A lot of countries that the Imperial Japanese Empire invaded will never forget the atrocities. But it's also too important to remember the humans lost and that civilians, soldiers, everyone suffered under this war. On both sides. I have no doubt that there are Imperial Japanese veterans that do, at the time, you know, these guys were young and believed what they were doing was right. But as old men and having time to look back on everything, one can wonder, was it the right decision? Now, one instance of this, of, you know, the Japanese and them realizing that, you know, stuff had changed and that what they did was wrong, was he was a Japanese ace. His name was Saburo Sakai. He was basically, like I would call the Red Baron of the Imperial Japanese Navy. And August 42, he was stationed in Rabaul, the Gibraltar, I guess, the Gibraltar or the Pearl Harbor of, well, the Japanese Empire in Papua New Guinea. He was flying his Mitsubishi Zero, and during an ensuing dogfight in the first days of Guadalcanal campaign, he took a bullet to the eye from an SPD Dauntless dive bomber, rear gunner, and flew his plane back to base, profusely bleeding from his injury. Now, Sakai would basically still continue to fly throughout the war, but after the war, he became, a peaceful man. He didn't look back on it with, I served my country. He looked back on it with remorse. He ended up becoming a Buddhist monk and a devout Buddhist, and dedicated himself to peacefulness. He was not, pleased with his service. He knew what happened and what he had done. And while he was not committed in any atrocities, he took people's lives. Again, this young man held remorse. And it's important to remember that all these sailors that died at Midway, Japanese sailors, went out in excruciating ways. They went out in horrendous ways. As everyone knows, Akagi, Kaga, Hiryu, and Soryu were all destroyed at Midway in very violent explosions. The American SPD Dauntless bombs penetrated right through their flight decks and blew right up in their hangars and everything. They blew up these carriers, and these men were incinerated and engulfed in infernos. These young boys died horrific deaths. They were not taken peacefully. They didn't go out in their sleep. They died horrendous deaths. And while everyone serves their country and takes pride in it, I can't help but feel extreme remorse, and I pity those sailors that died. I really do. And that's why I wanted to do the commemoration for the 81st anniversary as a Japanese ship, because I believe it's not only important to remember the victor side, but the loser side, the Japanese. It's important to remember what happened to them. Take care, captains.